What if I told you there are movies being told completely reversed that still manage to entertain from beginning to end?
Why so dramatic?
You're right, that might be a little stretch. Because after all, it's not that simple. But what if I also told you these exact movies at the same time feature spinning hallways, flipping trucks, and crashing airplanes, like a lot of them?
That part is a little dramatic.
The man to do it all is British-American film director, producer, and screenwriter Christopher Nolan. The only director that I can proudly claim to have seen every single movie of. By now, Nolan is already amongst the elite of modern filmmakers, with a filmography that grossed a total over $5 billion worldwide, whilst also gaining over 30 Oscar nominations, 10 of which he actually won. But that's not what I'm interested in. Okay, maybe a little. But I want to know how he keeps creating those masterpieces of cinema with such high consistency and quality that he's even been dedicated the phrase, "In Nolan we trust," suggesting that at this point, he can do no wrong. But at first here comes some personal information. And don't worry, only the most relevant bits and pieces.
And here we go.
At a very young age, he developed his interest for cinema, being inspired mostly by sci-fi movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey or even the Star Wars franchise. As a kid, he started to make his own stop-motion films with action figures or other toys of his. This led to him pursuing the notion of becoming a filmmaker. Compared to others in his profession, he took a wildly different approach to get his career started. He decided to study English literature because, quote, it gives a different take on things. At university, he got to know his future wife Emma Thomas, who he would later found the production company Syncope with. The years leading up to his breakthrough, he noticed it to be rather difficult to set foot in the British film industry. Yet 1998, he managed to release his first feature film, with a budget of only £3,000. Almost the entire crew consisted of friends of Nolan and Thomas, which made it financially much easier to accomplish. Ever since, Nolan's been making a name for himself, creating box office hits like The Dark Knight, Inception, or Interstellar. By now his filmography comprises 11 movies, with his most recent one being Tenet, basically the only movie of this year. Having caught up on the facts, let's get into his body of work. The British director often collaborates with his brother Jonathan Nolan in the screenwriting department. In fact, movies like Memento, which solidified his place in the industry, or Interstellar are actually based on stories written by Jonathan Nolan, the latter of which was even close to be adapted to the big screen years before by Steven Spielberg. Nolan's stories tend to be set in the real world, even when facing sci-fi or superhero movies, and blur the lines between genres. For his Dark Knight trilogy, he intended Batman to be put in a, compared to other comic adaptations, much more grounded and gritty world, to make the villain feel more of a threat. Bruce Wayne doesn't have superpowers, or neither do his enemies possess otherworldly abilities. Nolan does everything within his possibilities to create worlds with comprehensible physics. For Interstellar, he even worked closely with a physicist to make the space experience as realistic as possible, while still not taking away from the story. These movies often feature complex concepts, demanding for multiple viewings in order to understand them. He treats his audience as intellectuals, with no need to dumb down the message. There is always a general theme present throughout the story, maybe best to be seen in 2008's The Dark Knight. Here chaos dominates the story, with its personification by the character of the Joker, pushing the protagonist to his limits. Other examples would be fear and pain, two themes also manifested in the antagonists of the said movie's prequel and sequel. He also places continuous symbolism throughout his stories, like the totems from Inception that represent reality in a story of multiple dream worlds. Many of his characters constantly move in between questions of moral, facing decisions that go against their own ethics. One of his earlier works explores this idea in an interesting way. In Insomnia, the main character is a more or less morally clean police officer that gets into a conflict with his partner who ends up dead due to his hands. What's interesting is that he shot him by accident, yet begins to cover up what happened, just to be dragged into new conflicts with his own consciousness. Nolan is one of those directors like Tarantino, who always have a solid lineup of A-list actors to bring their dramatic characters to life. Actors who appeared in 3 of his films or more are, for example, Tom Hardy, Cillian Murphy, and the one to basically be in all of them, Sir Michael Caine.
I failed you. You trusted me.
I can't live like this. Oh, you think I can live like this? You think I bloody enjoy living like this? No! 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 No!
You're far away.
James and Philippa are
You
waiting.
know where you helped.
You have nothing to threaten me with.
In terms of cinematography, Nolan also takes a realistic approach. Contrary to the expressionistic style, where colors are used to express emotion or atmosphere, he usually keeps his color and lighting as they would naturally appear. But of course that doesn't apply to all of his movies. The Dark Knight trilogy makes use of low light and sometimes color due to its gritty setting, often shot by night. With Interstellar in 2014, he seems to have found his style in color, mainly using an orange-teal tone in his movies ever since. He is no fan of dynamic zoom lenses, leading him to use camera movement whenever a normal zoom would come into place. Nolan is one of the few directors to shoot on IMAX, which is amongst the world's most expensive formats. The Briton is notable for rarely using green screens. Most of his stunts and sets are created practically, which makes for a more immersive experience for the actors. Let me just name some of his most ambitious practical achievements. You remember that tank-like Batmobile from The Dark Knight? Well, they actually built that, including the little bike that came out of it. Then they flipped a truck vertically in the streets of New York with a ramp below it boosting it in the air just to bomb a hospital right after. In its successor, they performed the plane crash in the opening scene. Yeah, that also happened. Or the notorious hallway scene from Inception, where he actually had a complete hotel corridor built on a rig that allowed him to spin it around with the actors inside. Or last but not least, the huge airplane crash from Tenet, where they drove an actual passenger airplane into a cargo facility. Yeah, he really likes crashing planes. There's a lot of money and planning going into those sequences. One has to take into account that nobody should be seriously injured, so everything has to be calculated in the smallest detail. If you remember now that Nolan shoots on IMAX, you start to realize how much more difficult this gets. Due to the immense costs, he can't afford anything to go wrong, or otherwise he's gonna have to purchase some new film stock. The solution is pretty simple. Don't mess up and only shoot one take. Looking at the editing of a Christopher Nolan feature, you will realize there's a lot that can be said. However, I'm not gonna go too deep into basic techniques of montage, but instead focus on the one type of montage that makes his movies unique. At first I want to address the speed of his movies though. Nowadays very little movies take their time in telling a story, and that's fine as long as it works. Some films feel rushed while others seem almost jarring to watch because of their slow pacing. Nolan is part of those directors that find a fine middle ground. But in the case of The Dark Knight, you can see a film that is extremely fast-paced, which might seem like a weird statement, since it's still 2.5 hours of watching. But those could easily be stretched to the duration of 4 hours. But rarely ever has anyone complained about that, because Nolan makes it work. Of course there's a lot going on in this movie, but that's kind of the point. It makes sense for the story, thus works editing-wise. I guess you can say you'll have to treat this department for every film individually. Anyway, enough of that. What Nolan is most famous for, pretty much since him entering the industry, is his play with time, which is also an important motive in all of his works. He already explored this motive in some of his earlier short films, and kept on doing so in his current filmography. In Memento he intercut the main storyline, which is told reversed with flashbacks, flash forwards? I'm confused. Anyway, he cut back and forth, making them meet at the climax of the movie. Moving forward he perfected his craft, being inspired by the so-called chapitone from the music industry, where multiple increasing notes are laid above each other. He applied this to his storylines, cutting to one another until they all reach the climax, which doesn't even have to be at the same time of the story. All those examples of shifting chronology are written into the script from the very beginning. They don't just come into place with the editing, kinda gives you a better sense of the scheming mind of Nolan. His most frequent collaborator in concerns of score is Hans Zimmer. Producing the soundtrack for most of his films, the two of them got a great chemistry. Zimmer is known for his heavy-hitting loud film scores. Since the release of The Dark Knight's trailer with the German's music, almost every action trailer of the following decade adapted the approach of working with their music in their trailers. The score carries a lot of weight and also adds a lot to the intended tension of the according scenes. On Tenet, Nolan teamed up with the young Swede Ludwig Göransson. The basic concept of Tenet is already to be seen in the title, which is an anagram, meaning it spells the same reversed. With this movie, Nolan tried to take this notion to the next level, having a reversed timeline collide with the natural one. By the way, even the acting had to be done partially reversed, so they didn't just add that in post. So it only made sense for the soundtrack to have that same feeling of being reversed built into it, which they managed to pull off beautifully. If you still wonder now why they say "In Nolan we trust," take my advice, go see for yourself. Maybe you'll notice a certain level of wittiness and consistency, and who knows, maybe next time you'll see Nolan on a movie poster, you think twice if you really want to waste your money on a Fast and Furious 15,